Hello, this is Brian Raya with week number 7 for the engine class. For week number 7, I was basically catching up with last week's sprint, which was terrains part 2. I have not done the particle system as a result of working on last week's sprint, but I'll give a brief demonstration of what was done this week. So pressing enter, I'll enter the game, and in the bottom screen for my debug window, you can see the message that I'm currently not touching the ground. I'll quickly switch into my God cam to show the AABB on the ground currently rendered, and that follows our soldier around. As we move around, you can see that area light up. Moving on to a collision test, if I rotate my soldier and move closer into this area, you can see that I do touch this area, and when I do, I have a light up for the first test being this light blue, and a pure contact being this bright red for the touch. And you can see as I move in and out, the colors do change with it, and the debug message also reads touching the ground in between all the not touching, because some of the blocks are not touching, but these that do touch are what trigger the touching the ground messages down here at the bottom. Going briefly into the code. Some changes were that the user will be able to provide their image for the load terrain. So you give it a user-defined name, the file that you want to use, the texture that you wish to texture on it, the size, and if you wish, you can also add the repeated U and V values, as you can see right here. Going on to a user-defined scene, a user would simply just set terrain to whatever their user-defined name of their terrain was, as well as set the collision terrain, or set the collision terrain to the object that we wish to test with that. Both of these two things are defined in the scene that the user derives from to create their own scene. Moving on, I'll go into the toy soldier, which now has a new overloaded call, which is terrain collision. That's located within collidable. So inside collidable, we have terrain collision, and this is what gets called through our collidable test terrain command. So after all the proper registration channels have been done, we have our collision manager eventually going into the terrain, where we extract our information for our AABB. We query the candidate cells that we wish to test through, and with the iterator we check each one of those cells and iterate through that through those numbers. Neither the iterator nor the rectangle area hold on to the collection that it iterates through. The collection is held by the terrain. I'll show that off in a minute. But we set the min and the max points for our AABB that we will render for debugging purposes. If it has not touched the ground, it will appear in this color. And if there is the possibility of a collision, we go into our collision test. Right now I only have the AABB intersection, and that is because for the moment I can only guarantee that the user will create an AABB for any given object. So my soldier, for example, only has an AABB. But if that collision has occurred and we register as red, meaning there is a full-on collision, we call the terrain collision of that object, If it's relatively close, so it's passed this test but not fully come into contact, we register as blue. And at the very end, we call the visualizer to render the individual squares on whether or not a collision has occurred. So going into the terrain rectangle area, the terrain rectangle area just holds some basic information. Not all this information is required, but I decided to define all of this just for the sake of simplicity, and we'll go back to clean this up. But the big thing is that the terrain is what holds the collection of terrain data, which in this case would be a min and a max point, and if a user wished to add more to this, they could just add on to the struct. What ends up happening in terrain data is we'll iterate through all this information, retrieve the cell from the terrain, and we'll extract the necessary information through getmin. So we call our cell, getmin, and getmax. Other than that, that basically covers catch-up for the terrain, and hopefully for next week I'll have some actual progress beyond what is required for the class. Thank you very much, and goodbye.